This is Empowering Homeschool Conversations.
We want families to come here and gain insightful strategies that empower them to successfully teach diverse learners at home.
Hosted by founder and CEO of SPED Homeschool, Peggy Ployer.
Our goal is that these powerful weekly conversations will boost your confidence to cultivate the best at-home learning environment for your student.
For more homeschool resources, go to spedhomeschool.com. You're listening to Empowering Homeschool Conversations with Peggy Ployer.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations. Today, we are going to talk about tips for making math concepts easier to learn. And my guest today is Dennis DiNoia, and he holds a M.A. in education from the University of South Florida and has been a Florida State certified secondary math teacher since 1988. Now, Mr. D works with students from around the world on a variety of topics, including math, life skills, test prep, and more. And he has a deep passion for helping connect educational concepts to everyday life and exposing students to endless possibilities and potential for their futures. How exciting. Welcome, Dennis. I'm glad to have you on the show.
Yeah, Peggy, thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. I was telling Dennis ahead of the show that we've been kind of talking a lot about these ways that students can really understand kind of like a little bit deeper and dig into their passions, experience learning versus just like it skimming over the top of them and we can check it off our to-do list. So I'm excited to have Dennis with us. He has a new book out that's called Teach, and I just listened to it, and he'll talk a little bit about that too and cover some of the concepts that you've learned through your many years of teaching. And so I just love for us to start out this conversation with having you share a little bit about, what do you think in your past has made you the best teacher, and formed you to be the teacher that can really teach where you're at right now?
Well, that's a great question, and thanks for that. And hello, everyone. Peggy, it's funny. It's like 1988. That's when this all began, right? And I'm like, wow, this is we're like 35 years into this, right? And here we are. And I think back, and I'm like, well, where did it happen? Where did I really discover teaching, right? And part of it for me is listening. There is something about how we listen to young people. And listening to a young person is different than listening to an adult, and listening to an adult's different than listening to a young person. Mm-hmm. For me, where it happened, and really this is, I as a public school teacher, and I taught in the school system until 2005, and then I was done after that, right? And we started developing the mystery math program. But I tell this story when I'm out at conventions and things like that. It's like I would tell people, as a public school teacher, one of the things that I did that most public school teachers did, and right around 3:00 in the afternoon, was we headed to our second job, because being a public school teacher didn't pay very well, right?
Right.
But my second job was tutoring, and so I was one of those road warriors, man. I was in the car and I was driving from place to place, and every day. And I finally actually opened up a center, and the center we had, I don't know, I think we had about 100 students a week coming through the center. I had to get more teachers. It was kind of fun for me. I've always had that kind of business mindset in the background. So it was great. But what really happened for me was the tutoring business opened my eyes to young people, because, as a public school teacher, I was teaching 7th grade, 8th grade. If I was in a middle school, high school, I had the 9th grade to 12th graders, but it was always the same couple of subjects during the day. But when you get in the tutoring business, you get to see everything, so I was having kids come in that were, kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade. And then, the 4th grader would leave, and the next person coming in was a 12th grader. And the person after that was back to a 6th grader. And then sometimes I'd get college kids that would come in. And so I started to pay attention, because it was like, I'm seeing, well, what is it that this 3rd grader that I'm talking to right now, what do they need to know? Because there was a 6th grader that was just here before them, what they were working on. And it started to open some pathways for me, so that I could start to look and see what are the things that kids need, because I could see where they were headed. And it was way more than my middle school or high school teaching career, because I was teaching an algebra class or geometry class or whatever the course was I was teaching. But I wasn't seeing where the kids were coming from and where they needed to get to. Like, we knew what the skills were in that class, but what were they doing on their way there? And me, that's what started to pave the way for me as a teacher. The second part of that was that, when kids come in for tutoring and they're asking a question, it's different than when you're in front of a class. So when you're in front of
Yes.
you're saying what there is to say, you hope they get it, you see them the next day, come back with your questions, right?
Right.
But when you got a young person, and they're sitting right in front of you and they're looking you in the eye and you can see they're not getting it, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it was like, I always had this kind of a rule for myself. If I couldn't explain it 10 different ways, then I probably didn't understand it myself.
Yeah.
And, and usually I was good. I could come up with 7 or 8. And if I got to 10, that was really awesome. But really for me, it was like, I needed to know that I could say it more than one way. And young people trained me. It really was. And what I started to notice was it was all based on their learning styles. And one young person would learn it one way, another would be another way. I'd see another 4th or 5th grader would come in and they'd sit down and they'd be working on fractions and they'd say the same thing that I just talked to another kid about, but they didn't get it that way. And I had to come up with a different strategy and start to look. So oftentimes I was asking them, well, what do you like to do during the day? And what's your favorite thing? So I was learning about them so I could relate what they were learning about to their life. And it made, that made a difference. The other thing I noticed too was, especially I noticed this when I was a college student, and you're sitting in class and the teachers are talking to you and they give you a definition, and I would be, boy, I'm going to have to go look up the words in the definition so I can understand the definition.
Right. Exactly.
And so when I started creating courses, I thought about, well, what would it be like to put the language in the language of a young person, of a teenager, like write it in the words that they know, as opposed to trying to get them to figure out what the words mean. And, sometimes people think, oh, you're just kind of dumbing it down. I'm like, I'm not dumbing it down. I'm just getting into a language that we're talking that young people can understand where I'm coming from. And it's just that it's at their level, as opposed to them trying to jump to my level, because it's already, math is confusing as it is, right? And
right,
then
exactly.
you talk to them and they don't understand what's going on. So, the background really was the tutoring business, and then like listening. And it was, it was great for me because I got curious. And I think that was, and I think that's something that we sometimes miss as educators. It's the curiosity. It's like, wow, why do they think that way? And what was that? And fortunately, my graduate degree, I had a choice. I decided I wanted to get the master's degree. And it was funny. It was like, I looked at the idea of the master's degree and I got to pick. There was math and there was counseling. And for me, I thought, well, let's see, I'm already pretty good at math. And if I take a math program, that's a lot of homework, right? And if I do the counseling program, I'm going to write papers about how I feel, right? I'm like, yeah, I think I want to do that. And I actually went that route, and I did my graduate work in counseling and psychology. But for me, it just opened up so many doors because it had me learn about how to listen. And it had me looking at how people learn, and that everybody's different, and like looking at different dynamics of young people, not only just, when they're sitting there in front of me, but what's going on in their home life and where are they coming from. So there was just so many different things. So my own education made a difference, but that led me to the practice, and the practice was being able to just kind of get in their world and hear what's going on for them.
Yeah.
So I hope I answered the question.
Yes. No, that's intriguing though. And I think there's so many parallels to parents who are homeschooling. First of all, that multi-age, we often like just cringe when we're like, I'm teaching so many kids at different levels, but looking at your experience, you saw that as benefit.
Right.
And how, how maybe it wasn't the math concepts or that you were teaching, but the struggles, coming in similar ways and in different things, and being able to take, absorb that information and see why. I think a lot of times we just default to, well, it's just whatever I'm using to teach. And a lot of parents don't feel confident in the subject as well. And so that can lead to a lot of issues, I'm assuming. If you're not able to take something from 10 different ways, you've got the one way and it doesn't work for your student.
Right.
And I know we've heard from a lot of parents. We had a lot of questions come in about, various like math facts and those types of things. Is it just that the one way doesn't work, or they haven't tried enough ways, or how What is your take on that as far as like, a student memorizing math facts? Because
Right.
there could be a lot of different things going on.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and I think that's really kind of the place to look from is there's a lot of different things going on, and there's the age of the student, there's their learning style and how they learn. And by the way, one thing I want to say to your listeners, right,
Yeah.
that for me to say something 10 different ways, right, that only has to do with math and maybe music, but other than that,
Mm.
science, that's not happening. Social studies, that's not happening. So,
Right.
one thing just to applaud our homeschool families and homeschool moms and
Mhm.
dads because you are doing something pretty extraordinary by you're taking it all
Yes.
on. And so, when I say, oh, just do it 10 different ways, I'm talking about a specific specialty for me. And that's what I
Mhm.
focused on. And that was a career path that led me to where I got to. So,
Yeah.
but with that, but back to math facts, oftentimes, you might even notice that you do something with a young person one day and you think that's going to stick and work, and the next day what was working before isn't working, then it stops
Yes.
working, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's it takes something, and it's funny because when you look at the research and you see, somebody says, oh, this is what the data shows.
Hmm.
Well, data's data, and that's, if
Right.
you've ever taken a statistics class and you've looked at statistics can be molded and kind of skewed and kind of turned into what you want them to
Yes. Yep.
say. So I'm more about that, when you're looking at like what's happening, it's like, you don't have to look much further than your own living room and really sit down with your young person and see what's going on with them.
Yeah.
And, and see. So with math facts, one thing I can say is, it does depend on their age. And I can tell you, for me, I was kind of a hands-on kid, and I learned my multiplication skills by counting pennies. Now,
Ah.
this is going to sound kind of funny because I'm going to show my age a little bit, but my parents used to, they would keep the coin jar, right,
Right.
and they would tell my brother and I, say, okay, every time you roll 50 pennies and put them in the wrapper, you get to take that to the bank. Well, I was like, well, this is awesome, right? I'm like, I'm like, 50 cents back then actually was like, you could
Right. Yeah. It
you could
wasn't.
get
You
5
could
packs
actually
of
buy
gum for
stuff
that,
with
or
it.
baseball cards. Yeah, so I was like, okay, let's go. But it was funny because I discovered skip counting on my own.
Hmm.
Uh, because what I was doing was I would see the pennies on the table and I was watching my brother count 1, 2, 3, and I was like, man, this is going
Right.
too slow. And so all this
Hmm.
started counting by twos and then by threes and fours. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, it's like, wait a minute, this is what they've been telling me in math class with the times tables. And so
Right.
I started to see the skip counting, and there's plenty of programs out there that utilize skip counting. I know
Hmm.
Matthew C is really big on that, and they
Yep.
start with the skip counting, which is awesome. And then you have programs like Saxon, which is more the rote memory, and you're
Hmm.
gonna do it that way and to memorize the times tables and flashcards and all the different things. So, it really is going to depend. So here's what I have: a go-to method,
Hmm.
and this method might sound a little different. We'll say that.
Yeah.
So, when you look things up on the internet, you're going to see everybody says what they say about it, right?
Right. Exactly.
So you won't hear this on the internet, but you'll hear it from me. So, if you have a young person in there and you want to discover with them, and when I'm going to use the word discover on purpose
Yeah.
because you're discovering with them what works. So you have them stand in front of the mirror. And while they're standing in front of the mirror, you can try it different ways. You can have them say it out loud. You can have them read it off a card. You can have them put the cards up and show the cards in the mirror. You can have them, if they're skip counting, to skip count. If you need music, you need a little beat in the background going and they got the
Mm-hmm.
drum going, all the different ways. But what you want to have the young person do is to look in the mirror and have them watch their own eyes. And it's a
Ah.
really interesting thing because when the eyes connect, and you can see it in the mirror, you'll see that they're getting it, and you'll know, and then that's the
Ah.
moment that this is what's working. For
Right.
me, I used to use that to try to memorize things. So what I would do is I would read something in front of me and I would read it out loud. I'd read it to myself in the mirror, and what was great was it's like I knew if I knew it or not
Huh.
because my eyes would let me know. It's like, hey, you got this, or my eyes would say, I don't think you got this yet. So
Ah.
it's just an interesting thing, and it's awkward. So I will tell you that too. So moms, you're listening
Well, we're
right now.
working on speaking
It,
skills too, right?
hey, yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
right. let's go stand in front of the mirror and talk to ourselves. And I know that sounds a little funny, but it really does work.
Right.
And you're going to
Well,
see
that's
so many
fascinating.
different things happen. Yeah, it's kind of a fun thing to see. And I know people are going to be worried about, they're going to groom themselves and the way their hair looks, and they'll adjust their clothes. They'll go through all that.
You don't have to post
Totally
it on
fine.
social media.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, probably don't videotape that
Yeah,
particular thing that you're doing, but have them experiment with it. And for the kids that say, "Mom, this is really weird," you just agree with them. You go, "You're right. It
Mhm.
is. So let's see what happens, and let's go
Right.
with it." And how weird can you be? So now
Mhm.
make funny faces in the mirror and be goofy about it. I mean, they're just kind of play with it, and
Right.
because you're out to discover and out to discover what works. And most of the time, it'll be kind of that Einstein approach. Like, it's going to be
Mhm.
by accident. Like, you're going to kind of wander into it, right? And that's the
Right.
greatest thing ever, because that is what discovery is like. It's like, now you've discovered something where there wasn't necessarily, like, we're trying to get to this end about how to best do math facts, but
Mhm.
we want to discover what works for us, and not necessarily, well, this is the method that I've used, so this is what's going to work for you. Maybe it
Yeah,
will, but if it
maybe.
doesn't, then you got to look to see what else is next.
Right. It's interesting. You brought up a memory for me while you were talking about that, because that whole skip counting thing, I remember them really pushing it in math, and I'm like, I would tell myself, I'm not dumb. I'm not dumb. I can get this. And so I would say the one, like 2, I'd say 1 silently in my head, I'd say 2 out loud, then I'd say 3 in my head, and I'd say 4 out loud, and so that's how I taught myself to skip count, and then, of course, it came automatically, but it was something I devised, and I think that's why I remember it so well, because somebody didn't tell me how to do it, I had to come up with it myself,
Right.
and
Yeah. That always
yeah,
is the best. Yeah.
and so
There's the
yeah.
tapping. You got all these different things you
Right,
can try, right? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and I think that, yeah, it brings so much power to the student, and I know you wanna talk about discovery, and that really leads us really good into that conversation about the difference between teaching a student versus leading them into that discovery mode. So, I would love for you to be able to just kinda tell our parents what that's about and why it's so important.
Well, I think there's a process to it, about, in when it goes through discovering. And so I'm going to kind of walk through this. For me, I have to tell you, this is how this started. Was my first year teaching. So I'll actually
Mm.
share this. So, when I started teaching, I was a young guy. I was in my 20s, and so of course, what's the school board do? They're like, "Dude, we're going to send you to the most difficult
Oh,
kids
yeah.
in the county, right?" And they're like,
I'll see
"You'll
if you
be great with
survive.
them. Don't You're a young hip guy." I was like, "Oh yeah, I can't wait." Right.
Y
Anyway, so I got sent to this program, and the students, it was a dropout prevention program. The kids they've been taken, removed from their local high school and sent to a vocational campus. Gotta imagine,
Wow.
take tough kids. And what do you do with them? You
Put
send
them all
them to an
together.
adult vocational campus. So now you've got
Mm,
16, 17, 18-year-olds on an adult campus. I
hmm,
don't know what they were thinking. That
right.
was a recipe for a mess, but
Yeah.
there we were. And so we work with them, and then, but they were getting some vocational classes. So it was kind of cool. But,
Mhm.
these were kids that they didn't want to be there.
Right.
They already had been labeled, and they knew that they were the troublemakers, are the ones that didn't want to come to school. And, so knowing that, right. And then
Mhm.
here I show up, first year school teacher, and I'm like, I'm going to change the world. We're
Yeah.
going to learn math together. And they're all looking at me like, yeah, right. And so, so I would give them work to do, give them their assignments, and I would tell them, okay, I'm going to take all the work home. I'm going to grade it over the weekend. I'm going to come back, and then, we're going to have a chance to go over and look and see how it went. And every week I did this on Sunday, and I would sit down and I would grade their papers. Now,
Mm.
as a public school teacher, I had 5 classes. There was about 25 to 30 kids in a class. So I'm,
Wow.
125 to 150 papers I'm grading. Well, can't say all that because not everybody turned their homework in. But the
Right.
ones that did, I took that with me. And I'm
Oh,
grading it, and I'm writing all these notes on it, and I'm making the smiley faces and the
right. Oh, yeah.
almost smiley face,
Being the
all
good
the
teacher.
things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I come back on Monday, I hand the papers to the kids, and no kidding, it was the same thing every time. I'd hand the papers to the kids.
Mm,
They'd look down at the paper. They'd look at their grade. They'd look up at me. They'd look back at their paper, and then they'd put it under their desk.
mm.
And I was like, "But you didn't look at the comments I wrote." They were like, "No, no, we
Right.
got it. We got it." Right. They just wanted to see what grade they had. And so I did this for a whole semester. And I realized, it's like, this is not working, right?
Right.
And I thought, this, and so kind of out of a frustration, I came back, came back after Christmas. And plus I was watching football on Sundays. I could grade papers, watch football. Football season was ending. I'm like, what am I going to do? I
Right.
grade papers all day long. So, I came back into class and, I told the kids and I said, when I say kids, these were teens, right? And I said,
Right.
all right, you guys, here's the deal. This is a math book. The answers are in the back of the book. So here's what I want you to do. You check your work. I'm going to assign the odd ones. That's the odd answers are there. And then you let me know what you got. And they looked at me like, what, just, it was the strangest look because they were so used to turning in their work. Somebody grades it for them. They give it back to them and then they tell them how they did and off they go.
Right.
And I was like, you know what? No, we're not going to do that. That's clearly not working. I'm not getting anything out of it and wasting my Sunday. So it's on you. Funny thing happened. They look in the back of the book and in the back of a math book, a traditional, textbook, right? All that's there is the answer and it doesn't show them how to do it. Right.
Right.
So next thing I know, these kids now they're all of a sudden they're like, but I got this wrong. Like, well, yeah, good. Sorry. Well,
Right.
but I don't know why it's wrong. Oh, well, bring it up here and let's look at it. And we started to have conversations and I thought, oh my gosh, we're onto something, right? Well, now you kind of think about the motivation that it's almost like that reverse peer pressure. Like one kid's checking their work and getting upset because they got it wrong and wanting to come talk to the teacher. And another kid's like, wow, is that what I'm supposed to be doing? Okay, fine. And then they would, so I know we're having conversations, the kids are talking, we're engaged in something. Their grades are starting to go up. And what was the whole the whole thing that started that was like, I'm not grading your work anymore, grade it yourself. And I took that with me throughout my entire career. So the first thing really for me about discovering was giving ownership of the work back to the student.
Yes.
And that was the very first thing. So in our courses, everything is written out step by step, all the practice problems, we have a complete solution manual and we tell students, okay, this is your work, you grade it. And then when you know that it's complete and done, then let us know. In fact, when it's complete and done and you have it completely done, you get 100% on it. So if you fix your mistakes, you're going to get credit for that. Well, that's a whole different way of grading. Kids love it because they're like, wait a minute, I can get 100 on everything. And I'm like, absolutely. And I always ask them, I say, and then if you don't make 100 on it, whose fault is that? It's mine. Okay, you got it, right? Look for this, right? It made a difference. And they bring it to us. And then then moms started to ask me questions about that. And the mom's question was, well, how do I know if they're not just copying the answers down? And I thought, that's a great question. How would you know? Right. And so kind of a funny thing. And they're like, well, I said, why don't you pick a couple of problems and have them teach it to you? And okay, good. Let's do that. Right. So what are we doing the next part? The next piece of this is that they're presenting their work. And they're sharing with parents. And if you think about, and Peggy, think about when you were homeschooled, right? Did you ever notice that when you first, as a homeschool mom, and for people listening, when you first started homeschooling, did you ever have that moment where you were teaching something and you stopped and said to yourself, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense to me now?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You never understood this before, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you think about why is that happening, it's because you're the teacher. And now you're delivering, you're presenting, you're the one that is now starting to make some connections and some insights. Now, I will say it has something to do with the maturity, right? So you're an adult. And so your brain's a little more connected and it's got different, different functions are going on the inside. Right. But still there's that moment that as you're the one presenting, you're literally present to what you're saying. And oftentimes, young people are just like, they're just going through the motions of getting stuff done and they just want to get it done and turn it in and have you grade it and give it back to them. Right. So we're reversing all that. It's like, no, you grade it yourself. And then you come teach me about what you're learning. Yeah. Talk about discovering. That's where it begins to happen. And like you said before in the mirror, right? Kids are learning presenting skills because they're talking out loud.
Yes. Yeah.
All these different things are happening. So they're learning about how to present themselves, how to present their work, how to do complete work. And, it's oftentimes my own staff, they send me something and I have to send it back. And I'm like, did you even look at this? And so it's like, how often that, I feel like how often that we're not good at editing our own work.
Yes.
And I think part of that is because we never were taught to do it. No one ever said to us, you send us complete work first. We were taught to do the same thing. Get your work, give it to somebody else. They're going to look at it. They're going to grade it. They're going to give it back to you. And then you figure out, and see if you understand what they wrote down as opposed to you you do the corrections yourself. It's your work,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when it's 100% complete and it's your best work, then give it to us.
Yeah,
And I think that makes a huge difference.
it
I know it makes a
does.
difference for myself because I have to go back. I have to do it even more because I'm training my staff to be that way with me. And so I have to be even better at it because
Right.
I'm going to be the example, right?
Mm-hmm.
So man, they're so excited when they catch me, doing something like that, right? The students, when I teach a class with our students and we tell them, if you catch, not all of our teachers will do this. I do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I tell the kids, I go, look, if you catch me making a mistake during a live class, like when we're doing like a Zoom class,
Right.
if you catch me making a mistake, I'm going to send you a $5 Amazon gift card. Right now, I've been doing that for years. Fortunately, I'm not teaching as many classes anymore. So it doesn't really cost me as much money, right? But man, you want to get kids paying attention to what you're doing. What a great way to do it. They're motivated. Of course, now it's like everything I write down, that's wrong. That's wrong. Well, what's wrong about it? And then now they've got to tell me,
They've
right?
got
And
it right.
so sometimes
Yes.
sometimes I actually did it. I did a good job, and then they're kind of like they're trying to catch me, but they didn't. But it's really, again, it's it's giving them that ownership and having them be on the hook
Absolutely.
for something that they're looking. But
Mm-hmm.
that for me is like, when they're owning something, they're out to discover versus
Yeah.
just retaining the information.
Right. Well, I think as you were talking about that, you were talking about how the fact that in the past and probably how I was taught, you were taught, with the someone else editing, we were never given the open door as to what that person's, thought process was as to why that was wrong. Or what, could have made it better. All of that learning, that extended learning was shut down. And we shut it down right at that point versus saying, this is an open door. This is a place where you can even discover more, and we want to invite you into that. And I think we do. We shut that door so often for students that they just say, "Well, that's not even a door that I can go through." And what a disservice that we're
Right.
doing, because eventually we want kids that do that self-discovery and dig into topics and go to jobs that, like, people who work for you that do that, but yet we're not teaching them that process of how to do that. And
Yeah,
yeah.
it does make a difference. I was in eighth grade, and this is the first time I kind of discovered it on my own, right?
Mm.
And if I tell the truth, I wasn't the best student, so we'll just kind of just leave it at that, right?
Okay.
But I was playing baseball and playing music, and that I just seemed to me like, well, that's what I'm going to do in my life, right?
Mhm.
So math, what are you kidding? And my eighth grade math teacher, I was in an algebra 1 class, and I think he kind of had just given up on me, and so we were taking a test one day and I really didn't know. I mean, I just didn't know what to do.
Right.
And he said, look, he goes, the solution manual to all the homework's up here. He said, you can have it and use it on your test. And I was like, really? He goes, yeah. He goes, he's saying that like, it's not going to make any difference at all.
Right.
So I went in and I'm looking at the problems on the test and I'm finding examples in this solution manual and I'm seeing, oh man, step by step how to do it. I
Right.
got the highest grade on the test.
Hmm.
And I said, can I use that anytime? And he actually let me continue to do it. Other kids wanted to do it too at that point, right?
Right.
But it showed me something. It was like, wow, I can actually find this information. And
Right.
that was huge for me, and it was
Mhm.
got me through algebra 1, right?
Yeah.
So it
Yep.
was really good. Yeah, I think if he knew I do what I do in my life as a career, like he'd be like, "What?" But anyway,
Yeah.
he actually provided something, not on purpose. I don't think it was his intention, but for him, it was like it was a
It
way
was
to get
probably
me
his
to
last-ditch effort with you.
exactly right. He's like, "Here, man, here's I'm going to get you off my back, right?"
Right.
So
Uh, yeah, but yeah, I mean, what a great experience that has helped you help just thousands of students and families that, yeah, for a different way of doing things. And really, he wasn't giving you the answer to that specific question. It was just a light question. So
right.
that thought process that you had to go through, but yet you were motivated to really push through and to do it right. And so that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, you so it's not about the right answer, really. Learning isn't. It's
Right.
it's about the process.
Yeah.
And I think that's a mind shift that a lot of us have to make, because we're taught so much. It's all about just getting the right answer, and it does take longer. But in the long run, does it really take longer when you're teaching students how to learn not for the right answer?
Mm,
Have you seen that? Is there a
absolutely.
give and take in that?
Yeah, there is here's the give and take, if you're, if you're a parent and you're working with your own kid, you're working with your own child and you're noticing that it's taking longer, right?
Mm.
That little, when you turn when you turn a little thing upside down and the sand drips down,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
the clock,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
And, that for some reason, when it's your own children, there's less sand in the clock than when it's your, when somebody
That's the
else's
truth.
kid, right? You
Yes.
have much more patience with someone else's child than your own.
Uh-huh.
And, because we're so invested in them getting it.
Right.
But somebody else's child, you're like, if they get it, they get it. If they don't, they don't. Come on, we'll just kind of dance with this and see what happens. And, go ahead, mess it up, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because, letting them kind of move through that space, it can be a challenge. It can be frustrating and we don't want to do it. But if we take that time
Mhm.
to do it that one time, it might take an hour for them to get one problem. Once they get that one problem, they've developed a skill set that now they can apply. And
Yes.
that's huge. So it's going to take a
Yeah.
little bit of time up front to save time later.
Mhm.
So, so absolutely. And, when you think about getting the right answer, and again, that just takes us back to, our own upbringing and what we were told. And this is the way that you do things. And,
Right.
I think about my own, public school upbringing and what it was like. And it was all about, how many can you get right? That was it. And it wasn't even
Right.
how many you can get right. It was like, you come home at the end of the day. That's what your parents wanted to know. What do you mean you made a B on that or a C on that? Why didn't you get them all right? Why didn't you make an A? It's like
Mhm.
we were conditioned that that's what we do.
Right.
So, my question is always this. It's like, are you going to go through life and never make a mistake? Are you going to be
Yeah.
right all the time? Now, that's kind of funny to think about. Are we going to be right all the time? There's plenty of us that think that we should be, and and then there's some of us that think that we are, right? So there's
Yeah.
that. That's the psychology side of it, right? But
Right.
the actual thing of making mistakes and doing things wrong and not getting the right answer, that
Absolutely.
is a skill set. And if you can get comfortable with that,
Hmm.
that it's like, I mean, you just have to get to the logic of it. We're not always going to be right. We
Right.
know we're going to make mistakes. So why not make mistakes and
Mhm.
learn how to do what? Learn how to actually move through the spaces of when you do make a mistake. What can you do about it? And then where can
Right.
you go? And what skill set can you have so that you can get to the right answer? So yeah, for me,
Mhm.
it really is not about the right answer. It's about the process, like you were saying. Like, what can you
Yeah.
discover about yourself and your own learning and your own
Mhm.
pathway that gets you to how to get to where the right answer is? And maybe you never get to the right answer, but you discovered something along the way, and what you
Yeah.
discovered is going to help you much more than whether you got that answer right or not. Especially in a math problem, it's like, okay, well, there's
Yeah.
lots of math problems. You don't have to get them all right. Get as many
Mhm.
right as you can, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, there's always those little things that trip you up, like those negatives and
That's right.
the parentheses.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and I'm glad you said that because that is something, especially with boys, and I will say,
Hmm.
because their handwriting tends to be a little different than
Yes.
girls, right?
Uh-huh.
But it's normal that they're forgetting negative signs and they're getting things wrong. It does work itself out as they get older. So,
Yeah.
so there is that because sometimes I know parents get frustrated, like, yeah, but if they just keep forgetting to write the negative sign down or they wrote it down, but they didn't see it. And it's like, that's okay. That
Yeah.
is just, have them keep looking and have them keep noticing. And that will work itself out over time. So, it's
Yeah.
like, just think we get better at communicating. We get
Mhm.
better at, we become better readers, we become better writers. Those things work themselves out with practice. And that's the biggest thing.
Exactly, and it's that practice. It's people always say, well, I'm not gifted in that, but I know I started this broadcast 5.5 years ago as kind of like a taunt from my middle child, and I'm like, I am not good on camera. I can't do this, and now I see myself here, and I'm like, yeah, because I've done this for 5.5 years every week, and that's why I can now do what I'm doing. I was never comfortable in this space. But yet just keep doing it. And that's, we show our kids that persistence in our own lives. And it's making a lot of mistakes, reviewing. And I love that mirror thing, back to what you were talking about before, because you can evaluate yourself. We're a little critical on ourselves, but we got to have a lot of praise coming into it. but but yeah, you just improve through the process. And that's
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah,
yeah.
it is. I mean, it's a gift.
Mhm.
It's a gift for us, and we look like we're not designed to be perfect. We weren't made that way.
Mhm.
And we're perfect just the way we are, right? So
Yes,
you have that,
exactly.
but it's
That's
like we're
yeah.
we're perfectly imperfect. Is
Yeah.
probably one way to look at that. But I think for us, like I think that we get to be not perfect so that we can discover,
Yeah.
and I think that's a gift.
Mhm.
um and it's a, and it leads us to the next step, and it's we're being led, and go in faith, man, because that's what there is. It's like it's our gift, and it's our birthright to discover who we get to be,
Yeah.
and the path that's been laid out for us in this lifetime.
Absolutely. Yes. I think that gives us a good transition point. A lot of times we think of math as very conceptual and 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 procedural. So, but yet it's applicable.
Right.
um, and so we had a question from one of our viewers talking about, that the difference between procedural and conceptual math. And then she kind of went into, I have one child who enjoys Saxon, and then another who likes Horizons, another who likes BJU, and so she was asking, just a lot of questions about that. And she said, I know my daughter has gaps, love to teach and easy math facts, but I know it builds upon itself. So, um, but I'd love to address that procedural, conceptual kind of versus applicable, because a lot of times, we dive into one or the other, and sometimes our curriculum has that too. And then our kids are asking, well, how am I going to use this? And it's kind of they have to have both
Right.
kind of at some point. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
No, absolutely. And it's funny because you think about the procedural, conceptual, and if you do any research on it, right? What you're going to see is how much they kind of use their own words. Like you're going to see the word conceptual inside of what talks about being procedural. If you see procedural, they're
Mm,
talking about concepts. Kind of funny how the overlap is there. I
yeah.
think what this is going to come down to is the learning styles. And
Mm,
what you're going to notice is that everybody learns a little differently. And there
right.
are kids that they want that procedure. They need that step by step, and they want to have that, that recall information, and they want to be able to
Yeah.
learn geometry proofs are a great,
Mm,
kind of I would say great. It's an interesting way to look at this when you're doing a proof in geometry, because if you have memorized all of the theorems, you
mhm.
know, if you can see how it flows, sometimes that works for you. And sometimes that doesn't work at all,
Right.
right? Because it's the other person coming from the concept where they're looking at where they can see that big picture, and they can kind of look and see, well, how does this fit
Yes.
together? And it's almost to
Mhm.
them like a puzzle. And they may not know the definition, they may not have that recall, but they know how to get from one place to the next
Yeah.
because they're going through the concept, kind of that, that where they're looking at it like a project. It's kind of more that life.
Right.
I use the phrase, you ever heard where people talk about, that, yeah, well, anyway, I can say the biggest question I get asked from our students is, when am I ever going to use this in real
Oh,
life?
yeah,
So
yeah,
there's that, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And my response to them is always the same. It's like, in real life, well, what life are we in right now? Are you in a pretend life? I don't get it. Oh, are
Right.
we talking? Oh, let's talk about imaginary numbers. Okay, great. We'll bring it right back to math,
Yeah.
right? So I always use the phrase math outside of a math class, right? And
Mhm.
so, for students, it's just looking, it's like, what is that learning style? Are they a procedural kind of kid? And you're going to know, you're going to just
Right.
notice how they do their chores, right? Are they, are
Mhm.
they the box checker, or are they looking at the big picture, and they're looking at, okay, what do I need to do, and what this is going to look like? How's this going to look when it's all done? Right.
Right.
And there's your conceptual. They get the concept of, cleaning the room, right? Your
Mhm.
procedural one, they may not know what it's going to look like when it's all done, but they know the first thing they're going to do is, okay, dirty clothes, pick up, check, got it, right?
Mhm.
Papers on the floor, pick them up, check, right? So
Mhm.
it's looking at where they are, and then finding curriculums that match that learning style.
Yeah.
You know, And I think sometimes we look at it like, well, if I have a procedural learner, then I need to train them in being conceptual.
Hmm.
And I think that's going to come in time, but
Right.
for me, my recommendation is go with what works, right?
Yeah.
Because if you take somebody and especially you take a course, you take courses like Saxon and, and BJU Press and some, math courses, you know, they're hard, right? Our math class, we tell young people all the time, you get to geometry and algebra 2, it's hard,
Right.
and having them come into something that's difficult and then ask them to do it in a way that's not comfortable for them
Hmm.
can lead to frustration and can lead to, all the things that we talk about math is why people don't like math, as
Right.
opposed to, well, how do you best learn and
Hmm.
what works for you? And then how can you get to that? And then finding the curriculum that's a match for that. So guess what happens, moms? And I'm gonna tell you how it looks, right? You may have one Saxon kid at home. You may have another, you may have another Matthew C
That's
at
a hard
home.
thing to hear, but
You
yes.
may have a Mr. D math at home.
Mm-hmm.
The CTC math, which is a super cool program that's out there now. It's
Mm-hmm.
so you have to go with what works for your young person.
Yeah.
I know it'd be great if there's like a one size fits all, but that's not really how it works. So
Right. Well, because you as a curriculum developer have to have a standard like student in mind in order to create a product that is succinct. I
right,
mean, and I explain that to parents when I talk about customizing curriculum. It's like you have to lean into that curriculum developer because they were doing this job with a very set student in mind to make sure that they were purposeful in creating a product that made sense. Because
right,
you can't be all over the board. And so yes, sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it's not.
yep,
And I think that your question kind of leans towards the we had one other question from a mom about teaching a child math who has dyslexia.
mm,
um, is that kind of the same with that leaning into the strengths? Because I know a lot of kids with dyslexia are usually very artistic, they have the ability to see all these things. They're very conceptual.
right. Yeah, and and there's so many different things that people can do. One of the things that I've seen that works with young people that deal with dyslexia is using graph paper.
Oh, yes.
And so it's everything's going in a box and they can, take
Mhm.
their time. It's going to take them more time to write it down. So there is
Right.
that. But it does, in fact, the lattice multiplication, you Google that and look and see how it works in
Mm.
that. But the lattice multiplication also is great for kids that deal with dyslexia because it has them
Hmm.
put things in boxes and kind of work through that. So
Oh,
it's kind of,
okay.
it's going to take a little bit longer, but it does work. But I would also say for young people that struggle with them looking and seeing, and what they're seeing is not what's there, right?
Mm,
Go back again to what? Have them teach you. And
yes.
you just say to them, okay, we want to learn times tables today. How would you tell me how to understand what 4 times 3 is? And if you notice, I'm not
Mm.
saying what 4 times 3 is. I'm saying how to understand what 4 times 3 is, or
Ah,
whatever it is they're working on.
right.
And what's going to happen is that the young person that struggles, they're going to figure out how it best works for them, and they're going to tell you.
Right.
So when you give them the problem and say, well, teach me this, and maybe you're working on multiplication and it's just too much for them, right? So
Mm,
back up to something they can do, and back up to addition, back up to subtraction, and say,
mhm.
well, show me how you would do this, and how do you do it? How do you when you see this, what does it look like to you? Or what do you hear when you're doing this? They're going to
Right.
teach you in a way that works for them, and you're going to see they're going to kind of, it's like, I'm going to say they're going to expose their own gifts,
Yes.
because then from there, then you can see how it works for them, and how it would, I promise, the person that's got dyslexia learns it way differently than the one that doesn't, right?
Right.
But they can do it, and they're going to do it in a way that works for them, not
Hmm.
necessarily the way that works for their siblings, or for the mom or dad.
Right.
But I would always start with, be verbal, have them teach you, and let them tell you what's happening and how to do it. And if they can't do it with that concept, get to one that they can do, because you
Oh,
want to see,
yes. Yeah.
back up to something that they can do, so that you can see how are they processing things. And the more
Mm,
that you can
mhm.
observe them, the more that you can support them. And that is,
Yes.
because I don't think there is a one way to do, when a child has a specific learning challenge, don't think there's any one way. That's why if you
Right.
Google it and you look on the internet, you're going to see 20 different things, and
Right.
everybody's tried something different. But it's really, allowing your young person to tell them, let them
Mhm.
share with you about what works for them.
Right.
And sometimes they don't know, so give them something they
Mm.
do know, and then they'll share with you about that, and you'll see it, and it'll be there.
Yeah, we become a student of our child, and I think
Absolutely.
it's instead of like the master of the correct answer. It's,
Yes.
because that's I feel like we feel that way. It's like I've got to get them to this right answer, and yet we lose so much information by not doing what you just said and really figuring out the thought process and what really works for them. Because once we do, that clicks across the board on every subject, and
Mm.
then we understand the student themselves.
Right. Yeah, you said something really important. So I want to kind of add to that, because if you think about us as people, we just want to be heard. We just
Mhm.
want to know someone's listening, right?
Absolutely.
And when a young person can be acknowledged, like they know that they've been heard,
Right.
their confidence
Mm.
soars, and they're going to be willing to take that next step they may not have been willing to take before. So I'm
Right.
glad you said what you said, because it made me think of that. It's like, oh
Oh,
yeah, man, we just want to be heard, right? We just want to be listened
absolutely.
to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know we were asked a question by, Phoenicia. She had asked about her child with Down syndrome and teaching and
Mm.
addition subtraction. Would you say, like, the same methodology would work, and that's what you would recommend?
Absolutely, absolutely. Have them teach you, have them,
Mm.
and it's like you're going to take something, put something on the table, something they like, whether it's
Yeah.
cookies or coins or
Mhm.
I don't know, Skittles, whatever it is, right?
Right.
And put them in piles, and then just say, well, how many's there? And then ask them, how would you figure out how many there are?
Mhm.
Well, it's kind of a funny thing, because when and so we start in our courses, we ask people, we ask them the definition of addition. This is a
Ah.
funny thing, right?
Uh-huh.
Uh, and I get once in a while, I get something from a mom. So this will be fun.
Mhm.
Uh, I'll get something from a mom, and it's like, well, we know what that is. Why are you telling us that we need to define? This is too easy for us. Rah, 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 and I hear that, right?
Mhm.
And then ask them, okay, well, what is the definition of addition? And as I'm asking that question right now,
Uh-huh.
if you notice that you're having to think about it, like nothing's coming, right?
Mm.
Nothing's coming, or you're using words like sum, well, it's the sum of two numbers, right? Okay, well, what's a sum? And it's like,
Right.
and
Do you really
why does it have to
conceptualize
be,
that?
yeah, why does
Yeah.
it have to be
Uh-huh.
numbers? Why can't it
Mhm.
be letters or frogs or what, right?
Right.
When you get down to it, the idea of addition is that what we're actually doing, and this is what you do. You let's use Skittles for an example. And we've got our
Mhm.
young person with Down syndrome, and you put them out there. They like Skittles, right? It's like, well,
Mhm.
how many are there? And if you could tell me how many there are, you can have some, right?
Mhm.
So now they're going to do what? And if you think about what they're going to do, they're going to count them,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? Now, if you
Yeah.
put Skittles down and then you put pencils on the other side, and you say, well, now how many there are? They're going to tell you how many Skittles there are, and they're going to tell you how many pencils there are.
Mhm.
So this is our working definition of addition in all of our classes. It's count things that are the same.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because when you say that, guess what? That answers the question about why you need a common denominator when you're adding fractions. It
Yes.
works with like terms in algebra. How come you can add
Mm.
x but not
Mhm.
y, or x but not x squared? They've got to be the same so you can count them.
Right.
And it's funny, we break it down into that simple terms for kids because it's like they go, oh, okay. And
Right.
it's funny when young people, when they get it, they're just like, yeah, okay, whatever. And off they
Uh-huh.
go. And it's not
Right.
there's not yeah buts. It's just like, okay, fine,
The
right? So
world is not flipped upside down. It's just okay.
right, okay, I
Yeah.
get it. And, off they go. But I think if you can have them show you and show, the thing to consider is, well, what is addition and
Yeah.
what is subtraction? And so get really clear about that. It's like,
Mhm.
how do you teach subtraction? Do you know what subtraction that's my question to you as a
Right.
mom, and if you're not sure, you're going to be good. You're going to have to come up with a working definition for yourself so that you actually have a concept of what subtraction is. So and I'll
Absolutely.
give you a hint on that one too, since you asked about subtraction. But subtraction, some people say it's like taking away from something that's there. Okay, but is it really? Like, if
Hmm.
when we're looking at what if something's not there? Can you still take away from it? What if it was 0? What if it was negative, right? It's actually less than not there, right? So,
Yeah.
so it's like, whoa,
Make your
wait,
mind swim. Yes.
right? Yeah, it's kind of like, how many of you go, oh, dude, wait, okay,
Yeah.
we're spinning right now, right? I just thought this was a cool podcast. No, right?
No, yeah. You're making me
But really,
think.
yeah, action, we're looking at the distance between things. That's all it is.
Hmm.
Because if I ask somebody, well, how far is it from 4 to 7? Everybody's going to say 3.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to say, well, how'd you do that? You know what young kids are going to say? I counted from 4 to 7. 4, 5, 6, 7. I counted 3, right? Perfect. That's the distance. That's how far it is. But that's what subtraction is. So now we take that same concept and we apply it to slope in algebra, and we're looking at
Okay. Yeah.
the change in y over the change in x, and how far, well, what does a change mean? Well, the change means we're subtracting, but what does it really mean, the change? Well, the change is how far is it from one place to the other, and so it's interesting. So we take the definitions, we break them down into something that makes sense to a young person so that we can use them again later in higher level classes, right? But
absolutely.
So the first thing that I would say, there are different strategies you could use, but where I would start for yourself as a parent is, what do the words mean? And make sure you're clear what they mean, so that, and not just like the how to do it, right? Because I know people
the
know how to
definition you
add and
find
they
on
know
the
how to
internet,
subtract.
or yes.
Yeah. But what does it actually mean? How would you explain the definition? And then, and then go from there. And oftentimes once kids get the definition, they can do it because they see it the way they see it. And then they'll come up with their strategy of how to do it.
Right. Yep. And eventually they'll get the right answer, which,
Absolutely.
it's,
Yeah.
but they'll
And
understand
discovering
why
all
they
the
got
way
the right
there,
answer
right?
instead of just
Yeah.
getting the right answer.
That's right. Absolutely.
Well, Dennis, I know, and we have multiple groups on Facebook, and we have a support group. And so a lot of times parents will say, I'm struggling with math. What do I use? And they recommend your program. So you have been talked a lot about in our support group. And I know a lot of homeschoolers love your program. I would love for you just to share just kind of why parents who have students that struggle really just gravitate to your teaching concepts. And we've been talking a little bit about that now, and
Right.
you kind of integrate all these things into your program. But what specifically can families find in the program that you offer that really helps facilitate a lot of what we've been talking about this last hour?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get asked that all the time. It's like, well, why are you different than this program and that program? So the first thing is I just say, we're just super cool, right? That's, that's the first thing, right?
Well, that helps.
But really, we focus on language, because I've always looked at math like it's its own language, and we need to understand the words. That's why for me, like knowing what the word addition actually means, like getting it, like really getting it, like it's something that you can go back and you can actually share with somebody else. That makes a difference for people. The other thing that we do this on purpose, and we have videos that the lessons are video based, and the videos are designed, do not watch them from start to finish. You'll your mind will wander, you'll fall asleep, all those things happen, right? But have the practice problems nearby that go with the section, and do the practice problems while you watch the video. So you're watching a part of the video, you do the practice problems, you check your work, you come back to the video, you do the next part of the video, you check your work. And the videos are done in a particular way where I'm changing the color of the pen over and over again throughout the lesson, because every time the color changes, it's kind of like that. It's almost like it gets your mind just to kind of stop, refocus, come back again.
Yep.
And, so oftentimes it's like, that color change is almost like in television, when the commercial comes on, it's like, okay, time for a commercial. And you're just, oh yeah, okay, right. So it's that ability to refocus. I think the other thing is we really provide a lot of support for students. So we have sessions they can come to live online for extra help. They can email us. But the actually content and the context of the course is designed from, we look at it from a language, and we look at it from, we're discovering, it's we want you to take the quizzes more than once. We want you to master the concepts. The grade, the grade's the grade, right?
Right.
But for me, it's like, if you finish a section and you have it 100% complete, then that's your grade. It doesn't matter how long it took you. It doesn't matter how many times it took you to do it. We're really about mastery, and that kids learn how to discover on their own. So that's, we designed the program that way. And Kids
awesome.
tell us, it's like they get it. And I'm like, yay, that's awesome. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. And I've got the website up here. If you're listening to the podcast, it's mrdmath.com. And I'll make sure I put links in the description on YouTube as well as the podcast, so you can go right to that. And then you've got a book, and I know they can find that on your website. And
can.
it kind of dives into deeper some of the concepts we were talking about here today. Can you share just a little bit more about that as
Sure.
well?
Yeah. The book is called Teach, Creating Independently Responsible Learners. And basically, look, I've been at this for 35 years, right? So you're getting my 35 years and it's a short read. It takes about 2 hours to read the whole book. So,
Yeah.
you're going to kind of get it through, and it's written in a conversational style. So it's, you can listen to it as Polly did.
Yep. You can go through
and
podcast and
listen on
or
there.
not
Yeah.
podcast,
So
but the
absolutely.
audiobook.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Yeah.
It was
So,
good.
yes. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today and all of this great content. Our viewers have been quiet, but they've been on. So they just sent their questions in ahead of time. So so I think we got to all of them. I know there was a plethora about math facts, but I think we covered a good slew of that. So anything else you have to wrap up as we end this conversation?
Well, one thing is, I said your name was Polly, and I know it's Peggy, so my
Oh, that's
apologies
okay.
for that.
That's
Right?
okay.
So,
I massacred my
I
guest
knew there was
name last
a
time.
P and a Y in there, right? And I was like, oh, I got lost after that. But thank you, thanks for having me on. I just
Absolutely.
this has been a blast. So
Good.
this
I'm
is like
glad.
fun
And
time for me. So it's great.
it's late for you. Dennis is in Spain. So-
Yeah, that's okay. Nah, we're a late night crowd over here for dinner, so it's like we're
that's
wrapping up
good.
here. The dinner's not till 9-10 o'clock, so we're doing great. So all is
Wow.
good. Yeah.
That's great. Well, I appreciate you just taking out time sharing with us and just encouraging our families. I know math tends to be one of those things, and even if it's in the title, and we talked about way more than math, but I know that it's just a huge struggle for so many families, and just being able to understand not so much just the here, do this, you'll get this. And then we don't see it with our children because our children are so unique. But taking it more from the approach of the more global learning of what's going on, that process, and what our child really needs, and approaching it from that point of view. It's been very enlightening, and I know it's going to be helpful to many. So thank you for sharing and all the work that you do. It's amazing.
Yeah, and thanks to your families for being homeschool families. You're my heroes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So, yes, you all are amazing, and we appreciate you. And thank you for being regular listeners, watchers here on Empowering Homeschool Conversations. This wraps up our month of talking about helping students become more independent learners. We have quite a few different broadcasts that we did on this topic, as Dennis is just kind of wrapping up that with us today. And next month, we are diving into behavior, which probably most of you understand that if your child doesn't have that ownership of their learning, you're going to see some behaviors. And so we're going to talk about kind of just different ways to mitigate, to help children to kind of work through that. And so my guest next week is going to talk about 5 keys to improve student behavior, and starting to dive into that. So we've got I think I've got 5 different guests lined up that are all going to talk about that, from different areas of executive functioning to just being able to calm themselves down. We've got a bunch of different therapists and people on. So you'll want to join us for that. But check out mrdmath.com and Dennis's book. And yeah, and thank you so much again, Dennis. Appreciate you. And thanks for sharing with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, take care, everybody. God bless. And I will see you next time right here on Empowering Conversations.
This is Empowering Homeschool Conversations, provided by SPED Homeschool. Go to spedhomeschool.com to get resources and support for teaching your unique learner at home.